I never thought my own daughter would be the one to teach me that love can wear a very convincing mask. For 68 years, I believed I was a good judge of character. I had spent 31 of those years as a middle school librarian in Asheville, North Carolina, watching children grow into people, learning to read faces the way other people read books. I thought I knew my daughter better than I knew anyone on this earth. I was wrong about that. Or maybe I was right all along, and I simply refused to see what I already knew. My name is Ruth Calloway. I am 68 years old. I have a small white house on Birchwood Lane with a covered porch where I drink my coffee every morning, a vegetable garden that my late husband Gerald planted the year we moved in, and a fat orange tabby cat named Biscuit, who sleeps in whatever patch of sunlight happens to be available at any given hour. When Gerald passed 4 years ago, I made a decision. I was going to stay in this house. I was going to tend his garden. I was going to keep living, fully and on my own terms. Some people thought that was sad. I thought it was the most dignified thing I had ever done. My daughter is named Patricia. She goes by Trish. She is 42 years old and lives about 20 minutes away in a newer neighborhood with her husband, Derek, and their 2 teenage boys. For most of Trisha's life, we were close in the way that mothers and daughters can be close, not without friction, but with a deep, underlying current of love that I never questioned. She called me every Sunday. She came to dinner at least twice a month. After Gerald died, she came more often. She brought casseroles. She sat with me on the porch. She held my hand and said, "Mom, I don't know what I'd do without you." I believed her. That was my first mistake. Derek has always been harder to read. He sells commercial real estate, which I mention not to be uncharitable, but because it matters to the story. He is good-looking in a polished way, always dressed a little too well for whatever occasion he's attending, always smiling a little too broadly. Gerald never warmed to him. Gerald would shake Derek's hand and then come find me in the kitchen afterward and say, "Ruth, that man counts everything he touches." I'd tell him he was being unfair. Gerald would say he hoped so. Gerald was not being unfair. It started in the spring, about 16 months after Gerald passed. Trish came over for dinner on a Tuesday, which was unusual. Our dinners were always Sundays. She seemed distracted. She kept glancing at her phone. She asked me, almost casually, whether I had thought about downsizing, whether the house felt like too much to manage on my own. I told her the house felt like exactly the right amount to manage. She smiled and changed the subject. The next time she brought it up was a month later. This time, Derek was with her. They sat across from me at my own kitchen table, and Derek pulled out his phone and showed me listings. Retirement communities, what he called active living centers. He kept using the phrase peace of mind, and every time he said it, something in my stomach tightened like a fist. I listened. I asked questions. I told them I would think about it. I did not think about it, but I started paying attention. What I noticed over the following weeks was this. Derek began stopping by the house more often. Not with Trish alone, or with various men I didn't recognize. Men who wore the same polished look that Derek wore. Men who shook my hand and looked at my ceilings and my square footage rather than my face. He called them friends, colleagues, guys from the office. One of them, a heavy-set man named Carl who smelled of cologne and ambition, stood in my living room and said, "Great bones on this place," shaking his head in a way that made my skin crawl. I asked Derek one afternoon as pleasantly as I could manage why his colleagues were so interested in my bones. He laughed. He said he was just getting opinions. P. 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 He said the market was extraordinary right now, that a house like mine in this neighborhood could sell for, and he named a figure that was, I will admit, startling. He said, "Ruth, you could be set for life. You could travel. You could go somewhere warm I already live somewhere warm, I said. This is North Carolina. He laughed again. He had a way of laughing at things that weren't funny, that I found deeply unpleasant. The pressure came slowly at first and then all at once, the way bad things tend to arrive. Trish began calling me every day instead of every Sunday. The calls were loving and attentive and laced with a kind of worry that felt, if I am being honest, slightly rehearsed. She mentioned a woman from her neighborhood whose elderly mother had fallen and lain on the floor for 2 days before anyone found her. She mentioned another woman whose mother had left the stove on. She mentioned, gently, that I had been forgetting things lately. I had not been forgetting things. I was sharper than I had ever been. But when someone tells you often enough that you are declining, there is a part of you that begins to wonder. One Sunday in late July, Trish and Derek came together and sat me down and told me they were worried. Derek had a folder with him. Inside the folder were brochures for a place called Meadowcrest, which was described as a premier senior living community in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. The photographs showed smiling older women doing yoga and playing cards and tending raised garden beds. It looked pleasant enough, the way a gilded cage looks pleasant when you're viewing it from the outside. Derek talked about equity. He talked about my retirement savings and the house value and what he called a sensible realignment of assets. He talked for a long time. Trish held my hand and nodded at intervals. When he finished, I said I would think about it. That night, after they left, I sat on the porch with Biscuit, and I thought about Gerald saying that man counts everything he touches. I thought about the way Derek looked at my house. I thought about what it means when the people who are supposed to love you start using the word assets when they mean your home. Then I picked up the phone and called my friend Beverly. Beverly Ostrowski and I have been friends for 34 years. She is 71, still works part-time at an accounting firm, wears enormous earrings, drinks red wine with the commitment of a professional, and is the sharpest person I have ever known. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which for Beverly is an act of extraordinary discipline. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Ruth, you need to call Martin. Martin Chu is an estate attorney here in Asheville. I had met him at a dinner party once and found him quiet and precise and reassuring in the way that very competent people are reassuring. Not through warmth exactly, but through a kind of solid reliability." I called Martin the next morning. I want to be careful here, because what came next is important and I want to tell it correctly. Martin and I met in his office on a Wednesday. I brought all my documents, the deed to the house, my will, my financial statements, my retirement accounts. I sat across from him and told him what had been happening. He listened with the same stillness that Beverly had listened with, and when I finished, he looked at his notes for a long moment. Then he said, "Mrs. Calloway, what would you like to happen?" I thought about the porch, the vegetable garden, the orange cat sleeping in the sun. I thought about Gerald's roses along the back fence, which still bloomed every June without being asked. I said, "I want to keep my house. I want to protect what Gerald and I built. And I want to make sure that if my daughter and her husband are planning something, they find nothing left to plan around." Martin nodded once, as though this was entirely reasonable. Because it was. Over the next 3 weeks, Martin and I worked quietly. I did not tell Trish. I did not tell anyone except Beverly, who kept my confidence with military precision. What we did was legal, careful, and thorough. I established a revocable living trust. The house was transferred into the trust. My financial accounts were restructured, with updated beneficiary designations. My will was revised. A durable power of attorney was established, naming Beverly, not Trish, as my agent should I ever become incapacitated. I signed everything carefully and with full understanding, sitting at a conference table in Martin's office. With 2 witnesses present, and a notary who stamped each page with quiet efficiency. When it was done, Martin said, "Mrs. Calloway, if someone were to try to act as your representative without that power of attorney, they would have no legal standing whatsoever," I said. Good. I went home and made tea and sat on the porch and felt something I hadn't felt in months. I felt calm, not the fragile calm of someone trying not to panic, but the deep, settled calm of someone who has done what needed to be done. Then I waited. I did not have to wait long. In September, Trish called and asked if she and Derek could come over that weekend. She said they had some paperwork they wanted to go over with me. Just some things to help simplify everything, she said. Just to make things easier going forward. I said, of course. They arrived on a Saturday afternoon. Derek had a leather portfolio this time, not just a folder. He sat down and opened it with the practiced ease of a man who had done this before. Possibly many times with people who did not have a Martin Chu in their corner. He began talking. He said that he had taken the liberty of drawing up some preliminary documents, a power of attorney, naming Trish as my agent, a letter of intent regarding the property, to facilitate a smooth sale process, a few other forms. He pushed them across the table to me. I looked at the documents. I did not reach for a pen. Instead, I looked at my daughter. Trish was looking at the table. She was not quite able to look at me. I said, "Trish, look at me." She looked up. Her eyes were wet, which I had not expected, and for a moment, something in me cracked open. She was still my daughter. That part was still true. It would always be true. I said, quietly, "How long have you been planning this?" Derek started to speak, and I held up one hand. I was not speaking to Derek. Trish said, "Mom, we're just trying to help. The house is too much for you. You're alone. Something could happen." I said, "Something could happen to anyone." Derek said, "Ruth, if you would just look at the documents." I said, "I have already signed the documents that matter." He stopped. I said it again, calmly, because I wanted it to land the way it deserved to. I have already signed the documents that matter. The silence in my kitchen was something I will not forget for the rest of my life. Derek looked at me. Then he looked at the portfolio in front of him. Something shifted in his expression, some careful arrangement of pleasantness that he maintained at all times, and for one unguarded moment, I saw what was underneath it. It was not warmth, it was calculation. And beneath the calculation, something close to panic. He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I mean that 3 weeks ago I met with an estate attorney. I mean that this house is now held in a revocable living trust, of which I am the sole trustee. I mean that my financial accounts have been restructured, and my power of attorney has been assigned to my friend Beverly Ostrowski. I mean that any document you place in front of me today has no legal weight whatsoever, because the decisions have already been made, properly, with witnesses and a notary present." I watched him absorb this. He opened his mouth once, and then closed it. Trish said, her voice very small, "Mom," I said, "I'm going to need you both to leave now. I want to be honest about what happened inside me in that moment, because I think it matters, and I think the people who might hear this story deserve the truth of it." There was no triumph. There was grief, the particular grief of loving someone for 42 years and understanding in the space of a single afternoon the limits of what that love was built on. There was also, underneath the grief, something steady and clear. The kind of clarity that comes when you finally stop pretending that what you're seeing is something other than what it is. They left. Derek did not look at me. Trish paused at the door and started to say something, and I said, "Not today. Not today." After their car pulled out of the driveway, I sat down at the kitchen table and I put my hands flat on the wood. The same table where Gerald and I had eaten 30 years of meals together. And I breathed. Then I called Beverly. She answered on the second ring. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then she said, "Good for you, Ruth. Good for you. J, 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 J." In the weeks that followed, I called my attorney Martin and told him everything. He was not surprised. He said that what Derek had brought was, in fact, a power of attorney form that, had I signed it, would have given Trish near complete authority over my financial affairs and real property. He said it was not uncommon. He said he was glad we had moved when we did. I asked him what my options were going forward. He walked me through them carefully. There were certain steps we could take, certain things we could document. I will not detail all of it here, except to say that I chose to pursue a formal complaint with the state's Adult Protective Services, documenting the pattern of pressure and the documents Derek had presented. I was not angry when I did it. I was clear. There is a difference. Derek was, it turned out, already known to some people in this county. I will leave it at that. What happened between Trish and me afterward is harder to summarize. She called me in October. About 6 weeks after that Saturday afternoon, she was crying. She said Derek had pressured her. She said she had been afraid of him. She said she was sorry. I listened to all of it. I did not say it was fine, because it wasn't fine. I did not say I would never forgive her, because I didn't know if that was true. What I said was, "Trish, I love you. You are my daughter, and that doesn't go away. But I need time, and I need you to understand that what happened in my kitchen was a betrayal. And the path back from a betrayal is long, and it isn't paved with apologies alone." She said she understood. She said she would wait. We talk now, sometimes. It is not what it was. Maybe one day it will be something new, something we rebuild from honest materials instead of the pretty fiction we were both maintaining. I don't know yet. I am not in a hurry. What I know is this. I am still on my porch every morning. The coffee is hot. The garden came back this past June, better than it has in years. The tomatoes heavy on the vine, the roses along the back fence, so fragrant some evenings that I have to stop whatever I'm doing and just stand there and breathe. Biscuit sits in his patch of sunlight and regards the world with the magnificent indifference that cats have perfected over thousands of years. The house is mine. It was always mine. It will remain mine. I am 68 years old, and I am not confused, not declining, not in need of managing. I am a woman who spent 31 years teaching children to love books, who grew a garden with her husband through 3 decades, who grieved and stayed upright and learned when to be quiet and when to act. There is a thing that people sometimes forget about. Women like me, women of a certain age who are soft-spoken and who tend their gardens and who pour coffee for the people who come to sit in their kitchens. They forget that soft-spoken is not the same as unaware. They forget that tending a garden requires patience. And patience is not weakness. It is the most dangerous kind of strength. I was not passive, while my daughter and her husband drew up their plans. I was watching. I was learning. And when the moment came to act, I acted quietly, carefully. 3 weeks before they ever sat down at my table with their leather portfolio and their practiced smiles. They came for what they thought was mine to give away. What they found was a door that had already been locked. I have thought a great deal, in the months since, about what I would tell another woman in my position, a woman who feels the ground shifting under her feet, who hears the gentle concern in the voices of people who love her shading into something else. Something that sounds too much like management, too much like planning. What I would tell her is this. Trust what you know. You have spent a lifetime learning to read the room. The fact that the people in the room this time are people you love does not change what you're reading. Find a good attorney. Find a Beverly. Do it quietly and do it first. And then go sit on your porch and drink your coffee and let the people who are counting your assets discover that they have miscounted. The morning after Derek and Trish drove away from my house for the last time, I went out to the garden before the heat came up. The sun was just catching the tops of Gerald's roses. The whole yard smelled of late summer, warm soil and green things. And Biscuit had followed me out and was picking his way fastidiously between the tomato stakes the way he always does, as though he is conducting an inspection. I stood there for a long time. I thought about Gerald saying that man counts everything he touches. I thought, you were right, my love. And I was ready. I have my house. I have my garden. I have Beverly and her red wine and her enormous earrings. And Martin Chu, who is competent and precise and does not waste words. And my Tuesday morning bridge club and my Thursday afternoons volunteering at the library, where the children still come in looking for stories. I gave them one today. I will give them another one tomorrow. That is enough. That is, in fact, everything.